J.R. Martinez, vulnerability and self awareness, the key to overcoming adversity and living a fulfilled life. Step into an empowering dialogue with J.R. Martinez, a war veteran, actor, and motivational speaker, as he delves deep into his journey of facing adversity and emerging victorious. This interview uncovers how embracing vulnerability and fostering self awareness was pivotal in helping him navigate through dark times. JR shares his experiences of allowing himself to be vulnerable, developing a strong self awareness, and cultivating love for himself. He explains how these elements, combined with a genuine connection with others, can become a powerful force to overcome even the darkest adversities. JR's story is not just about surviving, but thriving, a true embodiment of the American dream. He illustrates the profound impact of kindness and generosity and how these acts of love can transform lives when given and received freely. Learn the importance of respect for oneself and others as JR emphasizes these values as cornerstones of his life's journey. Welcome to the Wellness Driven Life Show, where you're about to go on a wellness driven ride. Let me introduce our incredible guest to you today. J.R. Martinez is an Army veteran, burn survivor, actor, motivational speaker, New York Times best-selling author, and Dancing with the Stars season 13 winner. JR has traveled the world speaking with troops at various bases and serving as keynote speaker for numerous major corporate events, nonprofits, universities, and Fortune 500 companies. JR devotes himself to spreading his message of resilience and optimism. Please help me welcome Mr. JR Martinez.
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
My pleasure, and the pleasure is really all ours. JR, so I'm excited to have you here. The happenstance, how we came into contact with one another, is a story in and of itself, isn't it? So you and my husband ran into each other at an airport as you were both traveling back home. And so what was that experience like? Because I think you're going to be able to tell it way better than I am.
So it was hilarious. So I had just finished speaking and I was at the airport and listen, I've had many moments over the course of my life in the last 20 years where I've been in public spaces, obviously when you have physical scarring, very visible scarring, and not only the face, but the rest of my body, it causes for people to look at you. And so your husband was sitting down with one of his coworkers, and I was on the phone and I was waiting for food, and your husband was he would glance at me, and I would we'd kind of make eye contact, and he'd kind of smile and just kind of wave, and I just kind of waved back, and I just assumed because I just finished speaking that he was with the conference that I just spoke to, and he too was flying out, and just kind of said hello, but I was on the phone, and he was respectful, and then at one point, after a couple of minutes of doing this, like we kind of made eye contact again, and then he kind of was like, is he was trying to show me a coin? That's what it was. He was trying to give me something, and I put the phone on hold, and I went and walked up to him, and he said, "Hey," he at first thought I was somebody else, which actually happens or not. It's funny. I jokingly tell people, and I have a sense of humor, and I tell people all the time that when I was injured and I saw my face and my body for the first time at the age of 19 years old, if you can imagine that, and seeing your identity completely changed, the
Mm.
one thing I said to myself was like, well, the positive from this is that no one will ever come up to me and say, "You look like somebody that I know." And yet somehow that has happened many times over and over and over, where people will come up to me and say, "Did you grow up? Did you go to high school here? You look like somebody I went to school with." I'm like, "How is that possible?" And then your husband thought I was somebody else, and I was like, "No, I'm not him." And I said, but I know who you're talking about. And, he's out there and he's doing a lot of great work. And he said, yeah, he is. He's doing great things. He's like, but and he said to me, you stay positive, you keep working because it's going to happen for you too. And I said, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I just, smiled, and I didn't feel like it was the right opportunity for me to say, well, I've managed to create some success for myself or anything of that nature. I was like, I just received it because he was really coming from a authentic place of just wanting to show, love to me. And so I just received that. And he said, obviously, he said, my wife has this podcast, this show, and we know we interview people, would love to, possibly have you on the show. And I said, yeah, sure. Let's. So we connected on LinkedIn, and then he, sent a message or two. Here we are. And, it's funny, right before we went live, he was obviously, there with you, and he popped on, and I told him that story about, when he said, you stay positive, it's going to work out for you. And how I was just kind of like, what do I do? Do I tell him like things are working out okay right now? Or do I hold off? I decided to hold off. He obviously said when he got home, he realized that, the sort of the level of success I had achieved at that point and at this point in my life. And so it's all good. Listen, I think what I love about that interaction more than anything was that there wasn't a focus on the fact that I was the guy that had done X, Y, or Z. It was more of like he was drawn to me because he
Mm,
saw somebody that, and this is one thing I realized early on in my recovery, is that I realized that these scars were a blessing because I can walk into any space, any space. People don't have to know who I am. And I know that just by being in that space with physical scars, I'm naturally going to catch people's attention. And
mm,
naturally, there's this window of curiosity that we all have. That's, 10 to 15 seconds where you do a couple of double takes and you stare a little bit and you're just curious, who is that individual? What happened to that individual? And for me, what I've taken away from that is, how can I, in that moment of curiosity that someone is looking at me, how can I leave them with something? And so I
mm,
just, not that I'm like faking, because yes, it takes work, it takes effort, but it also takes a lot of self care for you to be able to show up in this way. But
yeah.
when I step out into the world, I step out with a smile on my face. I step out, kind of authentically and organically who I am, and with the hope that your husband and other people that I come in contact with can say, "Hey, I'm connecting with you." Not even about all the other stuff. It doesn't matter about that stuff. What matters is that as a human being, there was an energy that pulled me towards you, and I believe in energy exchange. And so,
Mm.
we have a funny story, and I can give him a hard time about it, but at the end of the day, here we are, and we're having a great conversation, and that's what mostly I want to take away from
Yeah, absolutely. And he's been raving ever since and is
that.
extraordinarily humbled by the experience and the story. And it is a great story. So you have really taken it that has taken a while because this happened at a very young age to where the way you show up physically is drastically altered, and learning how to be around other people. And I love how you said that it has really been a blessing to you because you are given this opportunity to be noticed by people and to have an impact on others more so than just the average Joe. And
Yeah.
so I'm curious, what was it like for you? Let's go back a little bit because we haven't even explained to the audience who you are, where this came from. What are some of the beginnings with you, JR?
Yeah, so and thank you for that, because I think it is important when you're talking about my story. At least I think it is important because people are always curious of how I got from that point in my life to where I am today. And I think what's important for me, even when I do keynote, is to sort of kind of take people back to a period in my life when I was a young kid and I was faced with a lot of adversity. And at the time, when you're going through that adversity, in the sense of like moving a lot, my father wasn't in my life. He left when I was 9 months old. I was raised by a single mother. I was in communities where I was born in Louisiana, moved to Arkansas when I was 9, lived there till I was a senior in high school, and then moved to Georgia. But, during my period in Arkansas and Louisiana, I witnessed my mom be a victim of domestic abuse. Where we grew up wasn't necessarily, I mean, listen, this is a single woman, a single mother, who is from Central America and is migrated to this country and is trying to do the best that she can with what she has. And listen, I think I think parenting is one of the most if not the most difficult job in the world. I mean, for anybody, but I think when
Yeah.
you have limited resources or you feel like you have limited resources, it makes it even more difficult. And so I kind of found myself feeling like I sort of identified this later in life, but I feel like my mother and I were both kind of learning about life together and
Mm,
kind of going through our own journeys. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I almost kind of had to take a little bit of like a little bit more of a independent, mature, responsible kind of a parent role in our home. Where my mother has experienced a lot of trauma, has not, and notice how I said experience. I didn't say my mother has dealt with a lot of trauma, because to me, in my opinion, at the very least, is that you can say you dealt with it, and I immediately say, well, what have you done to deal with it? In this case, my mother has not done anything to deal with her trauma that she's experienced. She's only experienced it, and yet just continue to experience it because she has not dealt with it. Um, that's getting into a whole other conversation, but nonetheless, like I just experienced a lot of adversity. Listen, I felt like I didn't wasn't a part of a community. I wanted to be a part of a community. I was looking for
mm,
love outside of my mother. Listen, I'll be completely candid with you and your audience that when I was 16 years old, my mother came into my room one day and you know found me crying, sitting at the end of my bed, and she said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Sometimes I think about getting into a car accident because I want to know how many people would show up at the hospital." Now,
wow.
this is 2023, right? Like if we heard a 16-year-old echo those same words, I think most of us are going to respond a little bit differently. My mother's way of responding was to give me a hug, was to tell me she loved me, and to go make me something to eat, which at that time was all I needed. Was more than enough, right? But it's
Yeah.
not getting to the root of what the real issue is. And what I realized that I've been craving my entire childhood was this sense of belonging and community and love and unconditional love. And I felt like I just was missing out on that. So there was a lot of those challenges growing up as a young kid. And I didn't feel like I really felt that until I got into my senior year of high school when I moved to Georgia. And I know where you guys are located, and I remember a few years ago being in that area. I was there for a speaking engagement, and this doesn't happen often enough, but I happened to be there early enough that I just came downstairs and went to the ballroom, and I wanted to listen to the program before I took the stage. And there was a gentleman who's a chef in the Dallas area, and he does a lot of work with underprivileged children. And they asked him how he got into this work, and he said that he was at an event one time, and there was somebody he was talking to that was essentially referring to children with very limited resources or maybe not a lot of guidance as
Mm,
throwaway kids. And he says, "What do you mean by that?" And he says, "Well, these are kids that, they don't have resources, they don't have guidance, so you just kind of move them along, right? There's really nothing you can do for them." And obviously this struck a chord with him, and he said, "No, I got to do something. I got to be part of that solution." So he got involved in that work. But when he told this story and he mentioned the throwaway kids, I mean, it was as if somebody just punched me right in the chest. It hit me a certain way because and the reason I realized why is
yeah.
because I connected with that so much, because as a child growing up, I was in trouble a lot in school. From third grade all the way to 11th grade, I would get suspended from school for 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, multiple times, detention. I was not the most, academically, the kid that didn't thrive on that and didn't really put a lot of effort and attention into it. My defense mechanism was to say, "This is dumb, this is silly, nobody cares," and to be a cut up. And we all experienced that kid in that classroom. And no one ever interjected from an educational standpoint and said, "Hey, what's going on?" And it
Right.
wasn't until I moved to Georgia my senior year, where the first 2 weeks of being in this new school, where an educator stopped me and said, "Hey, I'm looking at, your transcript. I'm looking at everything. What's going on?"
Mm,
And that was the first time someone actually stopped to ask me a question and wanted to legitimately listen to what the answer was going to be.
yeah.
And who would have thought, if you looked at my life from up until I was 17 years old, who would have ever thought that I would be the individual that has this opportunity to be on this podcast with you, that has the opportunity to grace stages all over the world, that has had the opportunity? I mean, goodness gracious, right? But it took multiple people along the way to allow me to feel like I belonged, that I mattered, that I had a voice, that I was
Mm,
a part of a community, that people did love me unconditionally. And once I felt that, then I just sort of kind of let down these barriers and these guards and these defense mechanism that I had, and allow myself to just authentically, organically just show up as who JR has always been. I've always been this outgoing personality. I've always been this guy that likes to talk to anybody and loves to just get people out of their comfort zone and have a good time. That's always been who I am. That was tamed to some degree because of the experiences that I had. But the reason I share all of that is because I want people to understand that I am just a human being. I am now 40 years old. And what makes me more qualified to have obtained the success that I've obtained than anybody else? Just the fact that I've just paid attention to the experiences that I've had,
Mm.
and how those experiences were there to propel me and prepare me for what I refer to as the big boom.
Oh,
Years old and injured.
sorry, I missed you there.
And oh,
As
sorry.
what
And
you
so,
as what you say is the big boom. Tell me a little
yeah,
bit more about that.
yeah. So, I mean, like here I am, 19 years old. I mean, I joined the military after high school. I go to basic training for 3 months. And then, I'm assigned to my unit, which was the 101st out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky, about an hour away from Nashville, Tennessee. Well, some people probably say about 40 minutes away, but that's, man, they're booking. Um, but it's, for us, conservative drivers, I would say, even though I have a little bit of a heavy foot, but I would say probably about 45 minutes. Let's just compromise there. But I get assigned to my unit, and listen, early on, it was presented to me that we were going to deploy sometime soon. I, at the age of 19 years old, was going to go to war sometime relatively soon. We obviously had troops in Afghanistan already. We did not
Mm,
have troops in Iraq yet, but there were rumors about us possibly going. And I just sort of naively just told my sergeant one day, like, I'm not going anywhere yet. I'm 19. I just got out of basic training a month ago. And I got plenty of time. But it also reflects that I
mm,
was 19 and naive.
yeah.
And sure enough, 2 months later, after I arrived in my unit, I was on the plane with the rest of my unit heading over to the Middle East, going to war at 19. And listen, I mean, there's really nothing that can prepare you for combat and being in that environment. Obviously, there's extensive training you can go through, but that only simulates a portion of it.
Yeah.
Because you kind of know in the back of your mind there's some like there's a safety net of like, well, this is just an exercise we're doing, a drill we're doing. This isn't the real thing.
Well,
But I
sure. I mean,
never
you're
had
not
the luxury of having that though. I never
right.
went through training. I never had that. And yet,
Wow.
not to say that no pun intended here, but I was literally kind of thrown into the fire
Yeah.
where I had to deploy with my unit and just rely on the people in my unit to kind of guide me. And that in itself was its own experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there you're right. There's nothing that can really prepare you. I like to refer to a term as, I have a background in law enforcement. You don't rise to the level of your courage, you fall to the level of your training or,
Mhm.
what you have been given as far as your resources and the things that you have taught yourself or or others have taught yourself, and it's not usually enough, especially when you're going into a war zone. And yeah, 19 is so young. There's nothing, really nothing in life, at least here, not so much in America, unless you're in some really heavy, difficult areas and those pockets that are rough growing up. But there's not much to compare to or have you experience anything compared to a war zone
Right.
across seas.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was the challenge that, for me was, listen, I mean, we can get into a whole other conversation in regards to me feeling. Now, mind you, at this point in my life, I still had not identified that there was some voids in my soul, right? I'm not even,
Mm,
like literally in my soul,
sure.
there were voids, and I was seeking community, and we talked about that. And so clearly, I probably go into the military looking for that sense of community. Obviously, you hear a lot about that camaraderie, the brotherhood, the
Yeah.
sisterhood, and the bond that's created. But I didn't have that luxury to create that bond because literally 6 months after I joined, I found myself deployed. And 1 month into my deployment, I was injured. So 7 months after I joined the military, I found myself fighting for my life, and my
Right.
identity completely changed and taken away from me. And what I mean by my identity is that at that point in my military career, I had created two identities for myself. One, the identity that I knew that all of us know. When you look in the mirror, you know who that individual is. You can connect with that person. You have a relationship with them. You know yourself. the second identity that I was creating for myself was me being a service member, someone in the military that
Yeah.
kind of loved this idea of being a part of something bigger than myself. You mentioned law enforcement. You
Mhm.
understand this component of service, and I was like, "Ooh, I think I want to do this for the rest of my life." There's nothing that I've experienced that can kind of simulate and give me this feeling, and I like this, and I want to do this forever. Now, I didn't feel like I had the best leadership in a sense of where they were, kind of guiding me. But I also can kind of caveat that by saying, well, I probably was looking for a lot at that age, just because
Yeah.
I was seeking this and not
The
realizing that's what I
expectations
was
are
seeking
high.
for. The
Yeah.
expectations are high, and that's why there's that popular saying where it's like, we all have to make sure that we heal so we don't accidentally hurt other people. And what happens is you go into, if you don't heal and identify and sort of sit in silence and have that self-awareness and do that work to identify those things yourself, all you're going to be doing is putting this excess pressure on every situation or every person you interact with, expecting them to fulfill that void and expecting this situation to fix everything, versus kind of taking it for what it actually is, which is just this moment that's going to give you one piece of this major puzzle called your life. And so,
Can I
listen,
can I stop you for a minute and go back a little bit because you said something that I think is pretty key. You said just sit with yourself and be silent with yourself, slow down, stop, and to do that self-awareness work. Now, I'm curious, was that work done during the time where you were forced to do that based on what had happened to you physically, in war? And I ask that because I think oftentimes in life, there's something that shakes us, that rattles us so much that the only times that we actually do that kind of work is because of those external circumstances that brought us
yeah.
to the point.
Yeah. Well, yes, I definitely did that then, and I still do that now. I think that when you think about life, and I was literally having a conversation with someone the other day, and they were talking about, and it was a kind of a bigger conversation, but I'll just kind of like provide like the abstract version. But essentially, one of the examples he provided was, he said something about, I asked him, I said, it seems like you tend to be the type that maybe kind of is like glass half empty, waiting for the other, and he was like, yeah, I do. And I tend to worry about this, I tend to worry about that. I think about like, oh, business is good right now, but then what happens if I lose it all? And I said, and if things get slow, and right now things are slow, but business was great, and I'm kind of like upset about that and worried about that. And I said, what I've kind of come to learn in my life, at least for me, is that I've had these moments of great success and things are moving at 100 miles an hour to the point where I'm like, I can't even keep up anymore. I don't even know how
Mm,
efficient, authentic I'm actually showing up. But I'm doing it, and that is all that matters. And then all of a sudden, natural course of life, things just kind of slow down. Doesn't mean that it goes down. It just means that it just slows down. It
yeah.
just means that it's maybe doesn't continue to climb, but it doesn't mean that it's going on a decline. It just means that it kind of plateaus and it just kind of riding. And I've learned, because I've got caught in this trap of where it's like, oh no, I got to get back to that place where everything was at this 100 miles an hour pace, and I got to go, go, go. And anything that's below that is now perceived as I'm failing again. And I got to focus
Mm,
on trying to obtain that again. And what I've learned is, wait, no, there's a, like, everything you did prior to that 100-mile-an-hour climb prepared you for that climb. Now you have to then go back and reconnect with your work, rejuvenate yourself, take care of yourself.
yeah.
And life is presenting you with a moment of pause and saying, hey, okay, pause, slow down. Maybe you're getting a little bit of like, and I'll give you an example. So there was a point in my life where I was speaking nonstop. I mean, I think there was a couple years where I had a stretch of being on the road 250 days plus. I mean, I was
Mm,
everywhere. And that was great. That was amazing. But I started chasing not the impact of, you know, impacting audience members. It was more about like, oh, I'm doing X amount of dates a year. Oh, I'm making X
mm,
amount of money a year. And then all of a sudden things slow down and I freaked out. I panicked, which is not JR's nature. And I finally, after a few months of kind of just sitting still with myself, going on walks, because I'm not the type, my personality my brain is too busy to sit down and really do the traditional meditation. So I kind of have to do a meditative walk. I have to move a little bit. And sometimes it turns into a run where it's like no headphones, just pay attention to my body, pay attention to what's happening, pay attention to my thoughts. But the same, most of the time, I'm usually walking doing that just because I want to really be present. And if I need to stop and write things down or talk it out, I do that. But essentially, I was doing this for a few months, and I just realized, oh, the reason things naturally slow itself down, at least this is my interpretation, is because life was saying, hey, you're getting away from your core, you're getting away from your reason, you're
Mm,
getting away from your why. You need to get back to that. And then it was also preparing me and telling me maybe this isn't what you're supposed to be doing, for 300 days or 250 days out of the year. This is what you're supposed to be doing every now and then. Maybe there's other things you should be doing. Maybe there's other things that are going to fulfill you. And what I did at
mhm.
that point in my
Yeah.
life was I decided I was 32 years old, and I decided, you know what? It's time for me to go to college. I'm going to go to college. And at 33 years old, I started college up in New York City, going to Fordham University. And I didn't speak as much because I was like, oh, I needed to step away. I needed to. And so, again, those moments, we perceive them as like, oh, we're being punished and we're not being rewarded, and things are being taken away from us. But the reality is, you need to reframe the way you think about that and say, this is an opportunity for me to connect with myself, to connect with my work, to connect with why I show up every single day and for who I show up for. And if you do that work frequently, then you'll never feel exhausted or misled. You'll always be operating from your truth. And so for me, it's something I still exercise. I still find moments of pause and just sit with myself or walk with myself and just sort of marinate and think about, what is it that I'm doing? Where am I going? Is it the best thing for me to be doing? Um, but again, a lot of us, we're just afraid of that. We're
Mhm.
afraid of the silence. We're afraid of the perceived
Yeah.
darkness, right? We're
Yeah.
afraid because it's going to expose things about
Yeah.
maybe our lives or about what we know we should be doing. Like, for example, in a relationship, whether that be with a person or whether that be in a job, most of us are like, I know I should probably put my 2 weeks notice, and I know I should probably quit because this culture is not right for me, because there's no growth opportunities. I know that this relationship isn't propelling me, isn't supporting me, isn't encouraging me. I know that, but I'm comfortable. And if
Mm,
I stop and if I think about it and I close my eyes and I pay attention, then I'm afraid of what my natural body and is going to tell me. And what it's going to tell me is like, you know what you should be doing, but you're trying to avoid
yeah.
it. And so it's like, for me, I love those moments. I always tell people, like, and I told my wife this when we first started, before we were married and had kids, and I told her when we were dating, and I pointed out something, and I said, I believe it's tied to maybe this period in your life. And she was like, what are you talking about? I don't even think about it. I said, you don't have to think about it. I said,
Mm,
the mind has forgotten that, but the body remembers the trauma. The body just holds on to all of that. And so when your body is giving you the pit in the stomach, when it's giving you where you can't breathe, or when it's whatever, how it shows itself, that's a sign telling you there's something you need to pay attention to.
yeah.
And literally, she neglected it for years. And my wife is, through some life things, she ended up going to therapy. And I can tell you that one of the first therapy sessions, she came out and she says, oh my God. And she has this revelation that the therapist, who is more of the trained professional, of course, says, well, let's go back to phase in this period in your life. And I was like, I told you. And it was kind of one of those like marital moments where you're like, yeah, point for me. But essentially, like, it was like, see, you can't neglect that. And
Yeah.
most of us just try to breathe through it. Most of us obviously try to repress that and just distract ourselves with other things. For me, I like to sort of lean into that because I know that's where the opportunity lies.
JR, you beautifully explain things. Thank you so much for guiding us through all of that process. And I think that another one of those key things is that you continue to do the work. It's not just something that you did when you were younger, when you were forced to be knocked down. It's not just every time you're knocked down, but obviously that's definitely a key moment to be like, okay, I guess I need to focus on this because I'm
Yeah.
not feeling quite right. But I think a lot of people think that when they see people that have obtained this extraordinary success in their lives, that it's or they're living optimally, or this incredible health, or what have you, whatever the success looks like, people think it's so unobtainable for them, and they think that, oh, they don't have to really work at it, or they did the thing long ago and now they're where they're at. But that's so far from the truth, isn't it? Where
Yeah.
it is stuff that you have to continuously work on. You can't stay in an optimal health level, or mental level, and the reality is you don't stay in this high level, because that's not what life is. And so the best thing is to really learn how to navigate life's waves.
Well, the biggest one of the ways that I sort of present that to people is like, most of us are in a position in our lives where we have to, if we want nice things, we have to make a payment, right? Like there's a payment plan that comes with that. You want a nice home where it's like, well, you got a mortgage for X amount of years. You want a car where you got payments for X amount of years. Most of us are in that position. There's very few of us that are in a position where I'm a football fan. And so I grew up loving football. I still love football. And I'll make a reference for those that understand football that there was a guy, his name is Randy Moss, played in the NFL, played for the Vikings for a very long time, and one time he scored a touchdown and he did a touchdown celebration with a division rival, the Green Bay Packers, and he essentially pretended like he was mooning the fans. And so of course naturally here comes a fine for him, and so so of course paparazzi catches him on a cold snowy day in Minnesota as he's walking out of the facilities and going to his car, and they said, Randy, how did you pay for that fine? And he said, straight cash, homie, straight cash. And not all of us are in a position where we can pay for things straight cash. Most of us are having on a payment plan following that. And the reason I say that is because all of us are striving to have nice things. Let's just use an example, a house for an example. We want to have a nice house, right? Well, guess
Mm,
what? You don't just make one payment. You don't just all of a sudden put the down payment and now you got the home and everything's good. No, guess what? You have to show up every month and make a payment. You
yeah.
want a car, you want a nice car. Well, guess what? You don't just put a down payment and pay the taxes and do all that. No, guess what? You have to make a payment every month until a certain time. And then you decide maybe I want something else, and you put yourself back into that cycle again. But the point of that is if you want to obtain something nice, which all of us want, you have to be willing to make payments frequently. It is not a one-time decision. It is not a 19.99 and you can have this thing infomercial. It is 14 payments of 19.99 and you can have this thing, whatever the hell it is that you're watching at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning when you can't sleep. And now something shows up on your front porch and you're like, why did I buy this? But the point of that is that this is literally a commitment you have to be willing to make to yourself for the rest of your life. This is not just literally, yes, life and situations will force you in a certain state to be able to do that. But let me tell you what I've learned in those moments of pause. And this is something, again, I still practice till this day. And I literally said it to my wife. We have an 11-year-old daughter and we have a 2-year-old son. And so, here we are. I'm 40. When my daughter was born, I was young. I could run around, like do all that stuff. Now I'm 40 years old and we got a son who has a crazy amount of energy, wants to get into everything, and challenges us. I mean, and it's part of parenting. But my wife the other day, she was chasing him because he loves to run away from her. Which she's like, "All right, Leo, it's time for bed time, or it's time to get dressed, or it's time." He's like, it's a game for him. He's like, "Oh, Daddy, Mama, hi, hi!" And he takes off running around the house. And she said to me the other day, she said, "Oh, I have to carve out 20 minutes now every day when I'm trying to get him out the door to do something because I tried to catch him." Now she's
Mm,
exaggerating. It doesn't take 20 minutes, but you get the point.
sure.
And I said to her, I said, you should reframe that thought process and just think of how happy it makes him when you are chasing him, when he's playing this game with you. You should
Mm,
reframe that this is a blessing in this moment that you get to have that opportunity because pretty soon he started preschool that he's going to be going like full time. He's not going to be at the house every day for you to be chasing him, and you're going to wish you had that moment. You see, we're
yeah.
so conditioned that we're in something and we're trying to think of the period in our life when we're out of that thing. Like, oh, I can't wait to when my kid goes to school, or I can't wait to when my kid goes to college, or I can't wait to when my kids are out of the house. But then what happens is you're so busy looking forward
Yeah.
that you're not allowing yourself to be present and appreciate what this moment is actually the blessing that it is. And so those moments of pause early in my recovery, what it conditioned me to do is not only appreciate this moment for what it was, to
Yeah.
feel. I can't tell you how many times, April, I would sit in my room at 20, 21, 22, 23 years old, and I would just start crying. Like nothing that at least that I can think of triggered me. It was just I just felt it. You know what I allowed myself to do? I allowed myself to cry. I allowed myself to go there. I can and in that practice, what it taught me as well is in that practice, when I felt like I had absolutely nothing, the thing that I needed to focus on was work on gratitude. I needed to work on finding something that I could be grateful for in the midst of this chaos where my body's completely scarred, where I look completely different, where I can't even pick up a coin off of the ground because of my hands and the burns, where I had to learn how to walk and feed myself and dress myself and do all of those things. There has to be something. And I
Yeah.
would literally find something. And that is still something that I practice till this day in the midst of, oh, I lost this. Oh, I lost that. I can't tell you how many times engagements people have reached out and said, hey, we want to potentially bring you in to speak. And I'm like, hey, great. That's an event that didn't plan for. It's a last minute thing. Oh, that could be some extra income that's going to come in. Then they said, oh, we're going to go in a different direction. Now I look at that, I'm like, it wasn't, it's cool. I'm grateful because I got all these other things. It wasn't meant to be. There was a
Yeah.
reason because it was going to add more stress. I mean, you can
Yeah.
literally spend all day doing this. And I think that that's the challenge. And that's the call to action, I guess, is more the word. The call to action to everybody that's listening or viewing this right now is that I want you to be able to practice this exercise. I want you to find gratitude in the simple things. I want you to find a way to reframe your thought process in your mind around certain situations and say, instead of saying, oh, I got to carve out 20 minutes to chase this boy around, I get to chase this boy around because it took us a while to have Leo, right? There was infertility stuff and all these things. And yet we're blessed to have this healthy, vibrant little boy. We get to do that. And there's a lot of people that don't get to do that. And life is short and you just got to change the way you look at things.
Are you ready to accelerate your aspirations? Here's your green light with Driven Living Performance Coaching. Whether you're an athlete, a business leader, or an artist, we'll navigate you through tailored strategies that fit you. Ready to be on the other side of roadblocks? We're here to help you drive your performance to new distances. So what are you waiting for? Let's get started. Visit www.drivenliving.com today. JR, it sounds to me like you to your wife is what manly is to me too, really pointing out those moments of what we should be thankful for and grateful
Yeah.
for. So I think that's wonderful. Thank you for being that light for her and for everyone else. And I appreciate my husband doing the same for me. So I want to take us back a little bit because you had mentioned there were times when you're 20, 21 years old. I mean, probably, if it's fair to say, I have no idea, but maybe some of the most difficult points of your life where you felt so down, so unsure of what life was going to bring you given your new circumstances. But you have this story about a friend of yours who really allowed you to express that, express the crying and the vulnerability and all of the things that you really needed to let out, and in order to feel what you were feeling and going through at that time.
Yeah. So, the assumption is that when I was 20, 21, 22, because I spent nearly 3 years in a hospital recovering, the assumption is that that the time when I was in a hospital being the most difficult, the reality is they were not. Now, in the moment, of course, they felt like the most difficult, phases of my life. But the most difficult part of my life is when I got out of the military at 22 years old. At this point, I had this goal that I wanted to be a motivational speaker. I wanted to get into this space. And I felt like I wasn't necessarily getting, I wasn't, and I preface this clearly, I'm still on the search for something deeper. And
Mhm.
clearly, I'm still on this journey trying to find deeper connection and community and unconditional love, etc. But I felt every time that I approached people and asked them for an opportunity, people just kind of boxed me in, and they would like, oh, well, just go talk to veterans, go talk to military personnel, go talk to the burn patients in the burn ward. That's where you should be. And I'm like, no, I believe I bring so much more to the table. Why am I
Mhm.
being limited to? Why am I not being seen or heard? And you guys are just allowing whatever biases and, to
Mm.
essentially kind of dictate your response. And so I felt like I wasn't getting really a fair shake, and all that did was trigger a lot of this frustration and insecurity and anger, honestly, that I had about, this is my life now, where I'm in a because here's the thing, and I tell people this. I didn't really realize this until later on when I wrote my book. And I remember writing about the nearly 3 years I was in the hospital. And I remember pausing and calling my friend and saying, is it odd that as I'm sitting here thinking about my time in the hospital, I miss it?
Mm.
And he says, no, and no, it's not odd. And I said, well, why do you think that? And he said, well, that's just a reflection of the people that were there that took care of you. And it's true. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, you could focus on you had X amount of surgeries. Oh my God. But let me tell you about the amount of times that I laughed and I had great conversations with my occupational therapist, Kim or Ted. The time where my nurse, Mike or Bonnie or Captain Estrada came into my room. The time, like, I can go on and on about the endless amount of people, Katie Tyrell, Norma. I mean, on and on and on about the people that I interacted with that made me feel like I was a part of something. And I was also in a little safety net. I was
Yeah.
in a safety net where I was on a military base where there was no judgment. People saw me for what I was, respected me. Like, I was in a little safety net. When I got out of the military and I went into what we call the civilian world, now that was challenging, right? Because one, people aren't listening to me. People are now staring at me because I'm not accustomed to seeing this. Now there's so much more that I'm being challenged. Like, how am I going to respond to all this type of attention or lack of attention in some cases? And so, that honestly was the most difficult part because physically, yes, that was challenging. The recovery process, the emotional and mental part of it was the most difficult, as it normally is. And I think that unfortunately, what happens is that a lot of my friends and colleagues and peers that have served in the military that don't have visible scarring don't get the fair shake and the same attention that I will get, right? Because I have
Right.
visible scars.
Right.
And then, but on the flip side of that, people will immediately just say, "Jr., your physical recovery must have been very difficult." I'm like, but don't discount the emotional and mental aspect of it because I too went through that as well. So, right, there's two ways of looking at that, and you got to be able to kind of understand that. And so,
Yeah.
for me, when I got into the civilian world and feeling constant rejection, because that's what I felt it was, all it did was just trigger all this underlining stuff. And I just became very angry. And I just started to kind of, I mean, listen, I'm not happy about this time in my life, but I can tell you honestly, I was drinking. And then because I was 22, 23, 24, I was just battling and I was just surviving. I was just trying to
Yeah.
survive. And literally one night in Indianapolis, of all places, like with my best friend and some other veterans, we were there for a charity event for a nonprofit that we were working on, and literally, I remember somebody saying something in the car. We were on our way back to the hotel. We had left dinner. Obviously, people had a few drinks, and I was triggered by something. And somebody said in the car, and I responded in a snarky way. And my best friend, who's driving the car, said, "Hey, JR, calm down. Just kind of let it go." And I didn't like that he told me to essentially calm down and chill out. And so I wanted to fight him. I literally legitimately wanted to fight him. And he stopped the car and I got out. He didn't get out, but I wanted to fight him. And I just was in this space where I was not thinking clearly. I clearly was just a hurt young man. And I was just trying to take it out on
Mhm.
somebody. And what I realize now is I was taking it out on somebody I clearly felt safe with. I just didn't know how
Yeah.
to respond to that.
Yeah.
And so literally we get back to the hotel and everyone gets out of the car. My best friend tells me to sit in the passenger seat and he tells me to cry. I was like, I don't need to cry. And he tells me you need to cry. You need to cry. He's like, you feel physically, you haven't healed emotionally or mentally. You need to cry. And it's essentially I started crying. And it was like all this stuff started coming out that I honestly I don't think I've ever really paid a lot of attention to. I never don't recall ever thinking about. when I'm by myself. And yet all of a sudden these things started coming out. I started sharing. Let me tell you how important that moment was. So one, the courage and the bravery it took for him to be willing to put himself in a space with a young man that literally just tried to punch a window out of a car to get to him. That's what I tried to do. But he was
Mm,
still willing to say, I'm not going to run away and kick the can and let a throwaway kid. I'm going to lean in because this kid needs somebody. He needs something right now.
yeah.
He's 17 years older than me. That's why I say he refers to me as a kid. And I literally, this is how pivotal that moment was. Every time he and I would have a conversation prior to this evening, he would always end it with, I love you. He would always say, I
Mm,
love you. And I would always be like, yeah, that's weird. Okay, cool. Talk to you later, man. And I would just hang up. And I just never said I love you back because one, was never conditioned to hear another man tell me he loved me. My father left when I was 9 months old. The men that were in and out of my mother's
yeah.
life never said I love you, right? Like it just never were words that were echoed. And so needless to say, literally the after this conversation, I'm the first one that goes to him and says, I love you. Now, what Dan taught me, his name is Dan Vargas. What Dan taught me was he didn't just say, hey man, here's a book on vulnerability. Go read this book and come back and, give me a summary and write a thesis on what learn in this book. No, he presented a space and taught me how it's supposed to feel.
Yeah.
He taught me what vulnerability should feel like. And because he created that space for me, I'm telling you, April, after that, my life changed.
Yeah.
Literally, I'm literally going to say, so that happened around August of 2000. And we're looking at how I'm going to got to get my years right. It was 2007.
That's
2007,
about right.
literally a few months after that, I get asked to be in People Magazine as one of the 5 service members that they were going to sort of highlight with the anniversary of the Iraq War, approaching in March of 2008. Then after that, I get more speaking engagement. Then a year, almost to the day after that interaction, I get an email to audition to become an actor on a soap opera called All My Children. Then after that,
Yeah.
of course, I'm on the show supposed to be 3 months. It turns into 3 years. I get asked to go on Dancing with the Stars. I go on Dancing with the Stars. People are assuming that I'm just going to go home week 3, week 4. I end up winning the whole competition. And now I'm all over the world speaking, writing the book, New York Times bestseller. My life literally took off once I was willing to lean in, but I had to have somebody to show me how to lean in and
Yeah.
show me that it was okay to lean in, that I could do this and it wasn't difficult and I didn't have to do it alone. So the thing that I had been looming for my entire life, I found in my now best friend, Dan Vargas, who I always, every day, tell him I love him every day, even if it's like a text, even if
Yeah.
it's a quick phone call. I love you, man. I love you. And I've now have been able to learn how to then show my other friends, especially the guy friends, because we guys, we think we're so cool. We think we're so tough. We can't say I love you. And if we say it, we got to kind of say it like in a certain tone and the delivery. And so that
Right.
way it doesn't feel like no one thinks anything. Like, I don't care. I look at my boy Dan and I'm like, dude, I love you, man. I freaking love you. I
Yeah.
taught my other friend that was in the military, like he and I told him one day, he was going through a rough patch, and I said, man, I love you. And you could tell the hesitation, and then he was just like, well, yeah, I love you too, man. And now we get off the phone, and I'm like, I love you, man. I'm like, I love you too, man. And it's
Yeah.
like, that's the way it should be. It shouldn't, forget the whole
Yeah.
masculine, feminine, forget about that. Let's connect at a heart level.
Yeah.
And so my
Yeah.
friend doing that for me has changed my life. I mean, for the better. And I think, but I realized, April, that period of a couple of years after I got out of the military, when I wanted so badly to have these opportunities to speak, what I now realized, I wasn't ready.
Right.
The
Right.
things that I was talking about at that time in my life, I thought I was ready.
Yeah.
What it was by my desire and that passion and knowing that there was something there. I was literally, every time that I spoke at that period of my life, I was surface, baby. I wasn't going deep. I wasn't being vulnerable.
Yep.
Once I really understood how to open up and be authentic and connect with my audiences, now my career took off.
Yeah. So many things in that. First off, you evoked such an emotional response. I have a little tear in my eye because what your story, JR, yours and Dan's story is just, you're right. It's that pivotal moment in life where you had this this human compassion, interaction, connection with somebody else that gave you the space and taught you how to, this is how it works. And it is a vital piece to, really being able to be more of our authentic selves and to also lead by example, which you're right, you weren't ready yet to step up on the stage and to be the voice that others needed to hear. And
Yeah.
so it's such a gorgeous thing. And I also love how you bring in the how we feel as a society, with the role that men feel that they need to play, the societal
Yeah.
standards based around that, and how you don't think that you should be saying I love you, even though that is really, again, vital for our human connection that we need in order to really evolve us as a species.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that is once we start to identify that this isn't essentially a weakness, this is an opportunity for us to grow and to have deeper connection, which all of us are striving for that. I mean, I
Yeah.
think about, I have a podcast and I remember interviewing this guy and he's from LA and we connected because of a nonprofit out there. And essentially as I learned about his story, um, he was born into a home where there was a lot of drug abuse. There was a lot of gangs and a lot of that violence. And him and his cousin made a pact, and they said we will never allow ourselves to get jumped in. But his house was essentially the hangout spot. And so what he would do is he would leave when he got home from school, go down to a friend's house, and he would hang out there and then come home
Mm,
later that night just to kind of get away from his
yeah.
house and that space. Well, one day he goes over to his friend's house and he knocks on the door and he notices somebody closed the blinds. Well, then he goes and he kind of try to peek in through the door and trying to see what's going on. And he notices that the mom of his friend is like telling his friend, "Don't open the door." So he's kind of like goes and knocks on the windows, and no one comes to the door, and he's just devastated. And he takes the walk back to his house, and a couple of his gang members that were at his house, they see him walk up, sad, and they said to him, "What's wrong? You look like your dog died." That's what he said. They said to him, and he said, "Nothing, nothing." And they said, "So you want to get jumped in?" And in that moment, he said, "Yeah," and he got jumped
Mm,
into the game.
mm,
And he went down this road of following that trajectory and that path. Obviously it was incarcerated, and when he was incarcerated, kind of connected with some people and kind of turned it around. And now he's out of jail. He's been out of jail for a long time and has kind of turned his life around, and now he's like a mentor and he does a lot of work with a lot of underprivileged children. But what I took away from that and what was so pivotal to me was, here was this guy that was hanging on. I mean, and he says, I realize now as an adult in hindsight, I was probably overstaying my welcome. But he's like, their house was so normal. I would just go there and just watch TV or play games or run around
mm.
the yard. And I would go to their pantry and have snacks. And, listen, I get it. I've been that parent as well that has been like, oh my God, the kid is coming over again. It's like we need our space as well. But at the same time, it's like the reason I say that is because most of us don't realize what interaction that we can have with someone that could literally save their life. And imagine if that mom, just said, "Come on in. I understand what's going on. I understand you're trying to stay away from it. Like, come on in, hang out. It's fine." Imagine if like that would have saved him so much trouble, but that wasn't the journey he was supposed to be on.
Yeah.
And, so for me, what it just says that, he was able to identify, like for me, what I was able to identify is that all of us just need that one person. All of us just need that one experience, that one thing. That's all we need. We don't need massive things and we don't need that. We just need little things here and there to sort of guide us and direct us and stick with us. And
Yeah.
at the same time, he allowing himself to just open up and to share that story. And so, it's really cool when you see, men that, have sort of embarked on this journey that allow themselves to say, hey, it's okay for us to, I work with an organization called the Call to Men, and essentially their whole element is to transform society's view of what manhood is. And
Mm.
the co-founder Tony Porter talks about this man box and how we're all confined to this man box based on what society's parameters are. And yet the whole work of A Call to Men is to essentially challenge men to get outside of that man box and establish healthy, respectful manhoods, and and helping end violence towards women. And because a lot of us men, not all, again, I'm not trying to paint everybody with the same brush, but a lot of men have a tendency to just sort of carry around, again, what I said earlier, this pain, and we end up accidentally hurting other people, but we're just hurting.
Yeah.
And I was hurting too.
Yeah.
And I literally tried to punch a window of a car to fight my now best friend. And I
Yeah.
haven't punched a window since then because of the way my best friend responded,
Yeah.
and how where he met me.
Yeah. Yeah. He gave you a lot of grace and acceptance, and that's love, when
Yeah.
we are able to hold space for somebody like that and allow them to respond in whatever way they're going to respond to, but still be there for them,
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever, however that shows up.
Yeah, absolutely. And and listen, I mean, the thing that I've learned a lot of things, and I'm still learning a lot of things. But I have just continuously been reminded that, I have to, our energy is everything, and we have to protect our energy. And I always tell people, you got to focus on what you can control. And if you start allowing yourself to focus on things that are outside of your control, my God, it's gonna be hard for you, because where your focus goes, your energy follows, right? Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
now there's clout. Now there's an ability to actually see the beauty in the situation, or find the silver lining, or practice gratitude and things of that nature. And so, for me, and I'm sitting here looking at it. If I know I ramble on a lot, and I apologize, but I'm sitting here looking at this, and
Let
this
me
is a
get you in.
story that, and it's so the way that it was pronounced to me is amitoba, amitoba. The story
Mhm.
with this goes like this. So, I'm the guy that gets the opportunity to come in and speak to, groups, and inspire, motivate, and sort of change the framework of their mind, or the way they think about things, and et cetera, right? However you want to sort of write a mission statement about that, but essentially that's what I do. And also try to have a little fun and have some comedy involved in that as well. But I remember I was coming back from an event in Atlanta. I actually had just spoken at Delta Airlines headquarters, and I'm a big Delta snob, so that was kind of a big moment for me. So I'm flying back to Austin on Delta, of course, and all of a sudden, I don't know what it was, April, but just something triggered me on the plane, and I just kind of got into a little bit of a funk. I got out, landed, got off of the plane. I parked at the airport, so I walk over to my car. I don't even text my wife or call my wife and tell her I landed. I'm like, I just need some time to myself. And I get up to the booth, and I immediately, I pull up to the booth, and they got that arm, where you can't, go through. And I just hand
Yep.
my ticket out. I hand my ticket out. I don't even look at the attendant. I just hand my ticket out like this, and I'm looking straight. And I can feel that somebody grabbed it, but they're not taking it. So I finally look at the person, and it's this, lady, and she asked me. She said, "What happened to you?" And I said, "Oh, I was in a car accident." And she said, "Were you in the military?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Was your entire body affected?" And I said, "Most of it, yeah." And she said, "Okay." She's like, "Can I pray for you?" And I was like, "Sure." So she
Yeah.
closed her eyes. She didn't speak. She just in silence. And then I saw her start writing. And I'm thinking, okay, now we're doing the transaction. Okay, whatever. Well, then she hands me a ticket. She hands me this. She says, "Are you familiar with," which is not the normal process. She says, "Are you familiar with Buddhism?" I said, "Not really." She said, "Okay, within Buddhism, there is a Buddhist that we call Amitabha. Amitabha represents infinite light, infinite wisdom. When I
Mm.
see you, I see Amitabha." And she gives this beautiful explanation about what she
Um,
sees in me, and about what I've sort of kind of meant to her in this short interaction that we've had. And literally, I was like, "Thank you." And she hands it to me, and literally, I pay. Metaphor of life, that little arm, the gate allows me to now actually proceed. See, life's telling me you can't go anywhere yet.
Metaphor of
Stop.
life.
But at the same time, think about that. What I want people to take away from that is not what she gave me. I mean, yes, that's important as well. But I had several opportunities over the course of that interaction to essentially shut it down. Like literally, when she asked me, "What happened to you?" I'm not going to tell you. Was it in the military? None of your business.
Yeah.
Was it your entire body? Why do you need to know? Can I pray for you? No, absolutely not. Have you heard of Buddhism? I don't care, and I don't want to know. Here's this thing. I don't want it.
Yeah.
So many opportunities, and honestly, so many of us do that. We allow us close ourselves off from this experience, and literally, the minute that arm went up, I pulled through forward. I called my wife and I said, "Babe, amito ba," and she's like, "What?" And I was like, "I'll tell you when I get home." And I literally drove home, my windows down, no music, and just like all of a sudden, this lady that if you look at her, she works at the airport in the parking garage as the gate attendant. Most of us would get caught in the trap of looking at her and saying, like, "Oh, that lady, that's what she does, right? Like, that's what she works." And they would look at me and say, "Oh my God, JR is the guy that got a chance to do this or that, and elevate me." But yet, she's the one that gave me the thing that I needed. So my point in that is, ladies and gentlemen, never close your off an amazing opportunity to feel something, to receive a blessing from somebody else, because we're so conditioned to believe that every time we interact with something, it's because they want something from us, because we have everything. So everybody wants something from us. When you should reframe that and you should say, maybe I'm having this conversation because I'm supposed to be getting from them what it is that I need at this stage of my life.
Yeah.
Start looking at people as people that have gifts to share as well, not just you being the one that is always giving the gifts. And if you feel like there's people that are giving you gifts, then maybe that's an opportunity for you to stop, for you to close your eyes, for you to think about where you are, what you're doing, and maybe kind of change the culture that you're in, because you deserve that.
Oh, that story made me vibrate. And I think that, definitely that is such an impactful last statement. But I want to ask you, JR, is there anything else that you want to share with our audience today? Because you have been such a light and you're full of wisdom and full of love. And I'm so excited to have had you on the show.
Well. Thank you for that, April. I mean, honestly, I know we unpacked so much, and I can't wait for this episode to come out, because I'm going to go back and listen to what it is that I said, because I get so caught up and get so riled up that I just go, and half the time I don't even know what I say. I just get so passionate about this. But listen, I'm just passionate about life, and I've been very blessed. Like a lot of people that I know have been very blessed that we have gotten a second chance at life. And what I have identified is that not everybody has that opportunity to get a second chance at life. And so the
Mm,
things that I'm sharing and the things that a lot of other people are sharing through their own stories and experiences is is an opportunity for you, while you're still in your first chance at life, to try to apply those things. As a friend of mine who was a POW in Vietnam for 6.5 years, his name is Charlie Plum. If you haven't looked him up, you got to look him up. The man is amazing. He was a Navy pilot, shot down, captured for 6.5 years. And he says two things that still sit with me till this day. He said, he would say to himself while he was a POW, he said, "Adversity is a terrible thing to waste." What he's saying is that even despite being a POW and there's nothing for him to focus on that's positive, he's like, there's something I'm supposed to be taking away from this experience. What is the lesson? What is the takeaway here? And another thing he shares is he realized that in the midst of the early stages of him being a POW, he was so angry, rightfully so, of course. And he realized, and someone said to him, acid does more harm in the vessel where it's stored than on the subject where it's poured.
mm,
I'm going to say it one more time. Acid does more harm in the vessel where it's stored than on the subject where it's poured. Meaning,
yeah.
you carrying around all this stuff inside of you. Yeah, you could be dumping that on people, innocent people that just sort of crossing your path in your journey, and you're just dumping, dumping, dumping on people. And yeah, that hurts them. And you know what? Guess what? They're going to decide at some point, this isn't the right space for me to be in. I'm going to kind of go over here and I'm going to leave you alone. The person it's going to affect the most is you, because it's just sitting inside and just eating everything you have inside of you. So, ladies and gentlemen, please do not neglect an opportunity to sit here and look at adversity and say, there's something I'm supposed to be taking away from this. Please do not look at every opportunity you have to interact with another human being, with the world, with the tree, with the bird, with something beautiful. just find yourself pausing and connecting with that energy in that moment. We all have to be willing to actually like stop and pause and be okay with that moment of silence with ourselves, because intimacy does not begin with another person. It begins with ourselves. We have to be willing to be intimate with ourselves and understand what that feels like before we could actually show up authentically to be intimate with anybody else. And so I just want to challenge every single one of you to take something away, one thing from this episode, and just try to, even if I, the way I explained it, but I just kind of introduced it, it's fine. Go and do some research. There's plenty of things on Google. Like you can find out more about it, and you can get some exercises and some practices and whatever. I just want somebody to not just say, wow, that made me feel good, or that was a cool story. No, there's something to take away from that.
Yeah, absolutely. JR, you are a beautiful human being inside and out. And those are my
Thank you.
favorite people. So I want to make sure everyone knows where to find you and get more information about you. Your website is www.jrmartinez.com. Easy. So for those of you who are listening in, you can remember that quite well. And for those of you who are going to dive a little deeper, find this information in the description below. JR, it has been, again, an honor and a privilege to have you on the Wellness Driven Life Show to share your stories and your light and your wisdom and all of it. We are so blessed to have you here.
Well, thank you very much for creating this space and this platform for us to be able to have this conversation. Again, if I wasn't with you, I'd probably just be goofing off doing something else in the house. And so, to me, this fuels my soul. And so, I just thank you for creating this space for us to be able to have this conversation. And just I'm glad that your husband was checking me out in the airport, and I'm glad.
Yes, me too. Me too.